All right, guys, so this is going to be section 3 of Star Defender. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by adding a boss to our game. So on your layout, you're just going to double click and we're going to make a sprite and we're just going to call him boss. Okay, insert, click on screen. Okay, and then what we can do is we can just load in the boss sprite, and the boss has 3 frames. So what I'm going to do is let's just go ahead and load in a sprite, and then I just have to navigate back to where mine are saved. So just let me get there really quick. Let me see here. It was under here, and then it was under here, and then intermediate. Okay, and then finally getting to Star Defender assets. Okay, and then I've got 3 boss frames. So what I'll do is I'll just maybe load in the first frame. Now, if you're doing the written presentation, they have you draw your own, but you can just load these in right away. So what you could do is, since there's 3 frames, you could right click down here. We could do import frames from files. And then if I just hold like control, I can just grab multiple files. So I'll just grab those final 2. Okay, so those are the 3 frames. Now, in the presentation, they don't tell you to change the animation speed, but I recommend just changing it to 0. That means it won't animate, and whatever frame they're on, they're going to stick to that. The way they have you do it in the written presentation is they have you make a separate event every time that says stop animation, and to me, that's just like a waste of space. Like, let's just make the speed 0, and then we don't even have to do those stop animation events. So that's what we're going to do there. Okay. Then while we're in, we're going to set the collision boxes. So you can go in here, and I think the collision boxes should be okay. In the written presentation, they have you manually set them because you draw it yourself. But to me, these collisions are fine. Like I could like maybe push this one out if I wanted to have it be more out like this. But you can simply just grab the red boxes and adjust them if you want to adjust them a little bit. So, like this one, I could move it out more to get like that wing in there. So maybe I'll do something like that, but it should be pretty good just by default. So get your collision set, and that was just this triangle box down here. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to close the animation window. We're going to put our boss off screen. Okay, and we're going to give our boss some behaviors. So with the boss highlighted, we're going to go to the behaviors tab on the left side. We're going to add turret. So you can just type it in, turret. Okay, we're going to add bound to layout. Okay, and we are also going to add custom movement. So add another behavior, custom. All right, so we've got those 3 behaviors. We should be good to go. So we can close that. Okay. Then what we're going to do is for turret. So if we have the boss highlighted, we're going to go down to the turret settings here, the properties, and we are going to increase the range. Um, in the presentation, they tell you to do it the 1469, which is a very oddly specific range. It must be like the exact pixels that he is away from the ship. Like you can just do anything over, like if you do like 1500, that would be fine. It could be just a nice clean number. It just has to be big enough that like the boss is going to be at the top, that he can like pick out the player from where he is. So 1469 or higher should be fine for that. Then we're going to make a sprite for the boss bullet. So we're just going to double click, make a sprite. We're going to call it boss bullet. It's very important that we label these correctly because we can't just call it bullet, because we have a player bullet, we have an enemy bullet, and we have a boss bullet that all are going to like do different things. So we got to make sure that they're all labeled separately. Okay, so I'm going to insert, click here, and then I'm just going to load in, and in your assets, you should have a boss bullet. Now, once again, we've got 3 different boss bullets. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click in the animation frame window. We're going to import frames from files. And then if we hold control, we can just click each boss bullet and we'll get all 3 in there. This empty frame 0, if you have one, just delete that. You should just have the 3 frames with the bullets in it. The collision should be okay. You don't really need to worry about that. Yeah, the collisions are going to be fine. But you do want to go to animation 1 and change the speed to 0. Once again, something else they don't have you do, they have you like do a code for stop animation every time, but to me this is just way easier. So turning the animation speed to 0 I think is going to be perfect. Then we want that boss bullet off screen as well, which I already have. And then we need some behaviors. So we're going to need just 2 behaviors for this one. So being that it's a bullet, the first one's obvious, right? We need a bullet behavior. And then we need another one called destroy outside of layout, which is right here. So that means it'll just auto destroy it if it leaves the layout. Um, so we should be good to go there. Okay, now we're going to go to our event sheet. Okay, and we're going to get some more global variable set. Notice on my event sheet too that I minimized all the groups. I recommend you keep them all minimized until you need to go into them and use them. If they're all opened up, you'll just get overwhelmed by everything. So it's nice to just keep them all closed off. All right, so at the bottom, I'm going to right click and add a global variable. This one's going to be called boss type. And the number can just be 0. Okay, and then we're going to make another one. But instead of a global variable, we're going to make an instance variable on the boss. So just from my object type windows, I'm going to click on the boss right here in the object window. And then on the left, I can go instance variable. And then we're going to add a variable called type. So essentially what we're doing, and I believe that type, yeah, that can just stay at 0. What we're doing when you look at the boss here, just to explain this, you can see we have 3 different boss animations. What these are is these are 3 completely different bosses. So this is a way that we can save code because the bosses are going to have a very similar function, but rather than create like a boss 1 object, a boss 2, and a boss 3, we'd have to create separate code for every boss. So what we do instead is we create one boss. We have the different bosses as different animations, and then basically we can control them or make them unique based on their frame number or based on their type. And so what we're doing is we're creating this boss type global variable. So we have a way to track like which boss type is coming next. And then we're giving the boss the type instance variable because we're going to link that up to the global variable. So then that type number is going to determine which boss shows, and we're going to link the type up to the frame as well. So if the boss is type 1, then it's going to play this frame 1 and be the green boss. And then based on when it's type 1, we'll have separate events that'll make it shoot and act differently than if it's type 2 or if it's type 0. So if that kind of makes sense, that's why we just created those variables there. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our boss shooting. So we are going to make a group for that. So we are going to right click out here and we're going to add a group and we're going to call it boss shooting. Okay. You can make a note there if you want to, but you don't have to. Okay. And then we're just going to add a new event to the group and we're going to do boss on shoot. And that comes from the turret behavior, right? And we're going to have them spawn a boss bullet. So we're going to add an action for the boss. And we're going to spawn another object. And we're going to spawn a boss bullet right here. Okay. And I believe we can just leave the layer and image point at 0 for now. That should be fine. Then what we're going to do is based on the boss type, we are going to have the bullet act differently, or we're going to have him shoot at different rates of fire, right? So what we need to do is on this on turret shoot, we're going to make a series of sub events for each type. Okay. So you're going to right click on the green arrow. You're going to add a sub event. And we're going to do boss compare instance variable. So I'll just type it in up here. Compare instance variable. Okay, and we want type to equal 0. So we'll click done. Okay, so now we have the type equals 0. So then we're going to add some actions to this. So we're going to determine what his rate of fire is. We're going to determine what the bullet speed is. And we're going to change the bullet frame to match the boss. Because if you remember, the bullet here also has different frames. So basically, the type 1 boss is going to shoot the type 1 bullet. The type 2 boss is going to shoot the type 2 bullet. So we're going to make the bullets line up with the different bosses as well and have them shoot different kinds of bullets. So we're going to add an action to this type equals 0. And we're going to do boss, and we're going to set rate of fire. So if we just type like rate, we'll get set rate of fire here. And the rate of fire, it's going to be kind of like an equation. So we're going to do 7 plus and then we're going to do 2 divided by enemy fire rate in parentheses. So we're going to do parentheses 2 divided by enemy fire rate right here. Okay. So basically what we're doing is we're just making the boss's rate of fire scale off of the enemy fire rate, but we're adding 7 to it to like increase the value a little bit. Okay. All right, so we've got that. And then we're going to do the boss bullet speed. So we're going to add an action to this. We're going to do boss bullet, and we're going to set speed. We want to make sure we do bullet speed, not animation speed. So doing the one with the bullet next to it. We're going to set that to 250. Okay. And then we're going to set the boss bullet's frame to match what the type is of the boss. So we're going to take boss bullet, set frame, and then we're going to set it to boss type. Okay. And you want to make sure it's boss.type. This is the boss's instance variable called type, not the boss type global variable. Okay, and the reason why that's important is the global variable is going to start at a number, but then as bosses spawn, that number could increase like mid-event. And so we want to make sure that the right boss, as it spawns, gets the correct bullet. And so by tying the bullet to that specific instance of the boss, we'll get the right bullet type. So that might not completely make sense to you what I just said, but just trust me, you want to do the instance variable there, not the global variable. Okay. Now, once you have all that in, we're going to take this whole event. So you want to click right here where that red circle is. You click right there to highlight it all. And we're just going to copy and paste that twice. So you could do Control C to copy, Control V to paste, or you could do Control and drag with your mouse. But I'll just do the keyboard. So I've copied that out twice. And now we're just going to simply edit these to change up the numbers. So we're going to change this one to boss type equals 1. So this is going to be the type 1 boss. In the type 1 boss, we're just going to alter these settings a little bit, right? So we're going to edit this, and we're going to change the 7 to a 5 to just change the fire rate around a little bit. Okay. And then we're going to change the bullet speed to 300. Change that up a little bit. Okay. And then that's all we really need to change. And that'll be unique enough that that boss will be acting differently. And then this one is going to be the type 2 boss. So we'll go 2 for the value. If it wants to go in, 2. There we go. Okay. And then we're going to do this fire rate. We're going to change the 7 to a 3 on this one. So 3. And then down here, we'll do bullet speed to just 200. Okay. All right, so now we've basically determined, so when the boss shoots, it's always going to spawn a bullet, but then based on its type, the bullet speed is going to be different, the animations are going to be different, and the fire rate's going to be different. So we've just, by doing all of that, we've added some uniqueness to our boss. Okay, probably a good idea to save, so make sure you're saving often. All right, so next we need to go into our wave system group. So we're going to go close that. We're going to open up our wave system, okay? And we're going to add a sub event to the on start wave event. So you're going to right click where those black arrows are. We're going to add a sub event. And we're going to do system compare two values. So compare two values, okay? And this part's kind of tricky. I'm going to explain what this means, but for the first value, we're going to type wave. Let me see, wave, and then the percent sign, which is shift 5, wave percent 2, and then we're going to say equal to 0. Okay, so it's going to say wave percent 2 equals 0. So what's going to happen is this, we're going to use this to trigger when the boss spawns, and we want the boss to spawn every other wave. So what the percent sign means in this wave percent 2, percent means it's going to divide the numbers and find the remainder. Okay. So basically what it's saying is if you take whatever the wave number is and divide it by 2, if it equals 0, that means there's no remainder, then this will trigger. So basically this is saying every even numbered wave is what this is doing. Okay. And we're going to make the boss spawn. Before we do that, we're going to just reposition this, and we're going to put this right above the repeat new enemies time. So it's going to go right there. So just grab it by that part right there, drag it up so it's right above it. It should be even with it. It's basically a sub event of the on start wave, and it should look just like this, and it should be lined up the same. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add some actions to this. So what we're going to do is we are going to do system, create, object, and we're going to create a boss. Okay. And the layer can be 0, but the x and y coordinates, we're going to put in 200 for the x, and for the y, we're going to put in 150. Okay, and then we're going to click done. So we're going to create the boss. This is if the wave is even, basically, is what this event is saying. Okay, then we have to tell the boss to add a turret target. So we're going to add an action for boss. We're going to type in target. We're going to say add object to target. And we're going to target the player. Okay, so we got that one. Then we have to set the boss's frame to match the boss type global variable. So we're going to add an action for the boss. And we're going to set frame, animation frame, and it's going to be set to boss type. Boss type right there. Perfect. Okay, so we've got that. And then what we're going to do is for the boss, we are also going to set his instance variable to match that as well. So we're going to add another action for the boss, and we're going to do set value. Okay, and then we're going to change the type, leave that on type, and then we're going to type in boss type as in the global variable boss type. So this is important because this is where we're setting the boss's instance variable type to match what the global is doing. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we are going to add an action, and we're going to do system, and we are going to do add to, and we're going to add 1 to enemies. So we're going to change this to enemies and then 1. So it's going to say add 1 to enemies. This is another part where I kind of see it as being an error in the written instructions. They tell you to set enemies to 1 here. So basically when the boss spawns, just like on an enemy wave, when we have, let's say we have 27 enemies spawn, every time an enemy spawns, it adds 1 to enemies. And that's important because then as we shoot the enemies, it subtracts from that variable, and the new wave triggers when that enemy variable equals 0. Well, same on a boss wave. On a boss wave, when a boss spawns, we need to make sure it adds to the enemy variable, because then when we destroy the boss, it's going to subtract from that and then trigger the next wave. The reason why set enemies to 1 doesn't work is there's going to be some waves where 2 bosses spawn, and it's just going to set the enemies to 1, and it's going to mess things up because then you're going to destroy 1 boss. It's going to move to the next wave early. So we actually want to add 1 to enemies so that when we get those boss waves with 2 bosses, the enemy variable should become 2, so that you have to destroy 2 to move on to the next wave. So do add 1 to enemies. The sample code and the written instructions might say set enemies to 1 here, but add 1 would be better. Okay. All right. Then what we are going to do is we are going to add an else. So we're going to go to this wave %2 here. We're going to right click and we're going to do add else. Okay. And we've got that right there. And what we're going to do is this else actually needs to go in with the repeat new enemies time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag it and put it in like that. I'm going to delete this old event and make sure that that else is right on top. So just like that. Okay. If that seemed confusing, what you could do is right on the repeat new enemies times, you could just right click here and you could just add another condition. And then you could just do system else. That would work too, if that seemed like confusing what I did. And then you could add it in that way. But the important thing is so this else needs to be a condition with the repeat new enemies times, and the else needs to be on top. Otherwise, it's going to turn red as an error. So basically what this event is saying is when we do the start wave, when the start wave function starts, if it's an even wave, we're going to do the boss spawn. Else, which means if it's not an even wave, it's going to do this repeat new enemy times and spawn normal enemies. So basically on even waves, we'll get a boss. Otherwise, we're going to get regular enemies. So that's what this all is saying right now. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. So I think we're done with wave system for a little bit. So we'll minimize that. Now we're going to go back up to the start group. We're going to go to on start, and we want to make sure we destroy the boss right away on start of layout. So I'm going to add an action, and we're going to do boss destroy. Okay. And it's really important that the boss and enemy destroy are at the very, very top. The reason why that's important is because we're setting the enemies to 0. We want that variable reset before we call the start wave. If these get destroyed after the fact, then enemies will set to 0, it'll call the start wave, and then those get destroyed afterwards, and your enemies will start off at like -1 or -2 before it calls the wave, and then it messes up your numbers. So destroy them first, then set to 0, then call start wave. So that order is extremely important right there. Okay. All right. So then what we're going to do is we're going to do some bullet collisions. So we're going to go into the bullet collision group, and we are going to do player bullet on collision with boss. So we'll just add a new event to the group, and we're going to do player bullet on collision with another object, and we're going to collide with the boss here. Okay. When it collides with the boss, we're going to do player bullet destroy as an action. So we're adding an action right here. And then we're going to do player bullet destroy. Okay, done. Good, we got that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add another event to the boss bullet group, or to the bullet collisions group. So we're going to add another event down here. And we're going to start by doing boss bullet on collision with player. So now we need to do boss bullet on collision with another object. And it's going to collide with the player. Okay, done. Okay, so boss bullet on collision with player. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add an action for player, and we're going to do player destroy. Okay, and we need to do boss bullet destroy. So add an action for boss bullet destroy. All right, so that looks good there. Now you'll notice when the player bullet hits the boss, we're just destroying the bullet and not the boss. We're going to come back to that in just a second. We have to set up like boss health, and we're going to make the boss lose health instead. So we'll come back to that later. Okay. Um, later as in right now. So we're going to make the instance variable for the boss. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the boss. So you can just click them right here on the right side. We're going to go to the left in the properties, and we are going to add an instance variable right here. And this should be under the boss. So make sure the boss is highlighted on the right. And then we go into instance variables. We're going to add an instance variable called health. And the number will be 25. Now, just so you know, when you're playtesting, and you just want to like kill the bosses quick, you can just lower that number temporarily, like lower it to 2 or something. And then when you know the boss is working, you can change that back to 25. Okay, so then we've got that set. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back to this player bullet on collision with boss. Now that we've created the instance variable, we can now subtract from his health. So I'm going to add an action here for boss, and we're going to do subtract from. We're going to subtract 1 from his health. Okay. Then what we need to do is when the boss's health equals 0, we need to destroy it. So we're going to do that as a sub-event to the player bullet on collision with boss. So I'm going to right-click on this green arrow, add a sub-event. Okay, and then we're going to do boss, compare instance variable. Let me see. Type in instance variable. There it is. Compare instance variable. I was just blind before. And basically, if the health is less than or equal to 0, like that, then we can finally do boss destroy here as an action. So boss destroy. Okay, so it should look like that. So it's player bullet on collision with boss. We destroy the player bullet. We subtract 1 from the boss's health. As a sub-event, if the player bullet hits the boss and the health is less than or equal to 0, then we can finally destroy the boss. So make sure that this is a sub-event of that event there. Okay? All right, so still inside the bullet collisions group. Now let's make another event to that group, and we're going to do boss on destroyed. So now we have to do something when the boss is destroyed, right? So we're going to do boss on destroyed. Then we're going to subtract 1 from the enemy variable. So we add an action to that. System, subtract from. We're going to take 1 away from enemies, like that. Okay. And then we have to make a sub-event that will basically, sub-events that are going to eventually trigger the next wave, right? So let's add a sub-event to this. And we need to know if enemies equals 0 after he's destroyed. So we're going to do system, compare variable. and we want to know if enemies is equal to 0. Make sure you guys do enemies and not new enemies. If you put the wrong variable in here, it'll throw everything off. So enemies have to equal 0. So if the enemies equal 0, we're going to add an action. We're going to do system set group active. And the group name, we're going to type a quotation mark over that. And we're going to do enemy movement, and we want it to be deactive. Okay, so we're going to deactivate the enemy movement group. We're going to wait 3 seconds. So I'm going to add an action, system, wait. We'll wait 3 seconds. Okay, then we'll add one to wave and we'll add one to boss type. So add an action, system, add 2. We'll add one to wave. Okay, and we'll add another action, system, add 2. And we're going to add the boss type 1. So basically, when you destroy the last boss and it's about to trigger a new wave, we increase the wave by 1 before we start the next wave, and we add one to boss type. So what that means, it's going to cycle to the next boss so that the next time that we fight a boss, we'll get a different kind. So that's what that part is for. Okay. Now, on this enemies equals 0, we have to make actually a sub event to this now. And we need to check if the boss type is greater than 2. So system compare variable, and we want to know if boss type is greater than 2. Because basically our boss type number is either 0, 1, or 2, right? So if this event triggered and brought our boss type to 3, we don't have a boss that fits 3. So what this event here is going to do is if the boss type is greater than 2, we are basically going to reset it back to 0. So we're going to add an action for system set value. We're going to set boss type back to 0. So basically now it's a never ending cycle, right? So if we kill the boss, let's say it's boss type 0, we kill him. Enemies equals 0. It'll add 1 to boss type. So then the boss type variable is 1. So the next time we get a boss type, we're going to get type 1 boss. Okay. Then we kill type 1 boss. It adds 1 to boss type, it becomes 2. So the next time we'll see the type 2 boss. We kill type 2 boss. It'll add 1 to boss type to make it 3. When that becomes 3, this is going to trigger and it's going to reset it back to 0. So then we cycle back to boss type 0. So that's the reason why we're having this set up like this. Okay. Then what we're going to do is on this is kind of a trickier part now. On this enemies equals 0, we're going to right click and we're going to add a blank sub event. Okay, and it should go right below the boss type greater than 2, and it should be even with it. Okay, and then we're going to add an action here, and we're going to do function, and we're going to call the start wave function. So you're just going to double click on start wave. Okay, the reason why this is blank is it just means there's no additional condition to it. We just want it to always call the start wave. We just want it separated from this boss type is greater than 2. So sometimes you will have blank conditions, but everything above it is still a condition, right? For this start wave to actually go through, the boss has to be destroyed and enemies has to be 0. So it will always call the start wave. We just have this extra step in here to check for the boss type to see if we need to reset it. Okay, so that should be it for the boss spawning and all of that. So now what we need to do, let's go ahead and throw down a save right here. Just make sure you're saving often, right? So now we're going to make a new group because we need to do boss movement now. We haven't done anything for his movement yet. So we're going to right click and we're going to add a group. We're going to call it boss movement. Okay. Here we go. And we're just going to start with a new event to the group. And we're going to do system every X seconds. Okay, and it's going to be every 1 second. Perfect. And what we're going to do is for the boss, we're going to set his horizontal speed. So the boss uses custom movement, and by default, I don't think it has a lot of speed. So what we're going to do is we're going to determine what his speed is going to be. So every 1 second, we're adding an action for boss. And then what we're going to do is let's just go ahead and type speed. And we want custom movement set speed. So you want the set speed with the wrench. Okay, and you want to make sure that it is horizontal because he's only moving left and right. And we're going to have that speed go to 200. Okay. Yeah, because if it's custom movement, I don't think its default speed will be 0. So now this is telling it what its speed is going to be. Okay. All right. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add a sub event to this every 1 second because we're going to have a little bit more going on here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do system compare two values. The first value is going to be the word choose. And then we are going to have it choose either 0 or 1. So we're going to do choose and then 0, comma 1 in parentheses like that. And then we're going to say if it's equal to 1. Okay. So this might seem a little complicated, but all it is basically this is just a little mini way to make it be a 50% chance. So basically every 1 second, it's going to choose the number 0 or 1, and if it equals 1, it's going to trigger. So basically it's a 50% chance every 1 second that this will trigger. And we're just going to add an action for the boss, and we're going to set its angle of motion. So we're going to type an angle here. Angle of motion. There we go. And it's the one with the wrench by it. So angle of motion, and we're just going to set that to 0. Okay. Um, so basically it's just going to make it so that it'll move to the right, right? So basically what's going to happen is every 1 second it's setting the speed to 200. So it's going to make it move horizontally, right? Then when this choose triggers, if it picks 1, it's going to set angle motion to 0, which will be to the right. If it chooses 0, then that means it's going to move to the left. So that's basically it's going to have a 50% chance to move left or right. So basically every 1 second, it's just going to randomly be jittering around either left or right, or it might not change. It just depends on what it picks. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to right click here. We're going to add an else. So you're right clicking on the choose event. So right click here. We're going to add else. And then we're just going to copy this angle of motion event down here. We're going to change this one to 180. So this is the part that makes it go left. So 180 is left and 0 is right. Okay, so every 1 second, it's going to have 200 horizontal speed. If it picks 1, it's going to move to the right. If it picks 2, it's going to move to the left. And that's what that else means. Okay, so that's the basic boss movement. Pretty easy, right? All right, so now let's go back to our wave system. And we are going to go back down to the wave %2 equals 0. So this event right here. Okay. Now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set up some sub events based on what the boss type is. So we're going to kind of alter this a little bit so that it's going to create different bosses based on the boss type. So what we're going to do is on the wave %2 equals 0, you're going to right click it and add a sub event. Okay. And we're going to do system compare variable. And we're going to say boss type is equal to 0. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to basically set up situations based on different boss type numbers. And so we're going to be doing OR blocks in this. So what you're going to do is you're going to right click in here and you're going to make an OR block. So what an OR block means is when you add conditions, instead of all of them needing to be true, it just means only one of them has to be true. And you'll see it as we put it in here, right? So let's add another condition to this. And then we're going to do system compare variable. We're going to say boss type equals 2. Okay. And then we're going to add another condition to this. And we're going to do system compare variable. We're going to say boss type equals 4. Okay. So you'll notice because we right clicked and we did make OR block, when we added the condition, it adds this OR statement in between. Okay. So now what this says is if boss type is 0 or 2 or 4. So it only means only one of those has to be true. Whereas normally without the OR block, it would mean that all 3 would have to be true. And we had to make the OR block first because it won't even let me make these as conditions normally because it wouldn't make sense as an AND statement, right? Because the boss type can't equal 0 and 2 and 4 at the same time. So sometimes you have to right click and do make OR block first, and then you'll be able to add different types of conditions knowing that it's an OR block. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take all of this boss spawn code up here. I'm going to hold control and grab all of it. and we're actually going to drag it down here to the part we just made. Okay. So just to reiterate that, we had all the boss spawn code up here. We're dragging it down into this new sub event we made based on the boss type. Okay. We're going to keep this part normal here. We don't need that. That part's going to stay the same. Set animation frame. Okay, so then now what we're going to do here is, because we're talking about specific boss types, we are going to specifically label frame numbers here. So here where it says set animation frame to boss type, we are going to change it to 0 actually. Okay, and then here, instead of having the type as boss type, we're going to actually change that to 0 as well. Okay, so change that to 0. And I know, like, you're probably watching this and you're like, well, when we originally made that event, why did we do boss type before and zeros now? The whole intent is when you're making it, you're supposed to be like testing it out in between. So at that point, you would have been able to test it and it would have worked at that point. But now we're modifying it because we're kind of changing the game a little bit. So if you're someone that's just kind of like cruising through the video, you might see me change something that we already put in. It's because when you do the presentation the written way, they tell you at certain points you should be testing the game out, and I kind of haven't been doing that. So just on your own, at any point, you can pause me if you think it's ready to test, like you can test stuff out. Okay. All right. And then the add one to enemies there is perfect. We're good to go. So now all we're going to do is this whole chunk of code, we're going to copy and paste it twice. So I'm going to highlight it, make sure it's all highlighted. I clicked right here on the left side, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, then Control V as in Van to paste again. Or if you want to hold Control and drag it out, you could do that too. Now, all we're going to do on these second two is we're going to alter these numbers. So this one, we're going to change the 0 to 1. So just double click it, change the 0 to 1. We're going to leave the 2, and then we're going to change the 4 to a 5. Okay. And then inside of here, we are going to change the location. So you're going to double click where that 200 is, and we're going to change the X here to 1000. We're going to change the Y to 50. So all we're doing is, because this is going to spawn different boss types, we're just adjusting the height and location a little bit of where that one's going to spawn out. And then the animation frame is going to be 1, and the type is going to be 1. So we're just going to edit those zeros to ones. Okay. So that should be good there. And then this one, we're going to edit this one. So we're going to change this 0 to a 3. We're going to change this 2 to a 4. And then we're going to change this 4 back here to a 5. Okay, done. Okay. And then we are going to change the 200 up here to 600. And the Y, we're going to change the 120. Okay. All right. And then we're going to change the animation frame to 2 and the type to 2. All right. So that's what this part should look like. I know it's kind of complicated, but just remember the wave %2 equals 0. That boss spawn code should not be in here anymore. You moved it down into here, and then we basically copied and pasted this and altered numbers. Now, this might seem really confusing to you, and you might wonder what's going on here. So what we're doing is, based on what the boss type is when it spawns, it still has this different code attached to it that's going to change. So basically the types here and the animation frames, that's going to change the visual appearance of the boss. Okay. And then what'll happen is you'll notice that because these are OR blocks, some of these numbers are repeated, right? So you can see when boss type is 2, both of these are going to trigger, which that means, so on a wave where the boss type is 2, you're actually going to spawn 2 bosses because these are both going to trigger. And they might look different based on the type. One's going to be a type 0 boss and one's going to be a type 1 boss. Okay, let's look here. If the boss type is 4, so here's a 4, here's a 4. So we're going to get a type 0 boss and we're going to get a type 2 boss when the boss type is 4. So basically what these OR blocks are allowing us to do is have situations where multiple bosses can spawn, essentially is what's happening there. Okay. All right, so we just finished up here inside the wave system doing these ore blocks. So now what we're going to do is we're going to minimize wave system and we're going to go up to boss movement. And because now we've added those situations where multiple bosses could spawn at the same time, we have to add something in here so that the bosses will act independently. Because the way it is right now, if we get two bosses spawning at the same time, they're both gonna gonna get the exact same variable. They're all gonna move identical, and we don't want that. So to fix that, we're just gonna add a condition onto this every 1 second. So we're gonna add another condition, and it's gonna be system, and we're gonna do for each. Okay, and we're gonna do for each boss. So you're gonna click and do boss. Okay, so now this says for each boss, it will determine independently, and so they could move differently now. Okay, now we're going to add a couple of global variables really quick because the other thing we're going to do is we're going to make it so that over time, the boss's health and fire rates could increase, but we can't do that through their instance variables that they currently have. So we need a global variable that can globally track it over time, and then we'll just tie it to their instance variables later. So let's go ahead and add a couple of global variables here. So let's add a global variable. We're going to call this one boss health. There we go. And we're going to set it to 25, which is what our default instance variable is at. And let's add another global variable. We're going to call this one boss fire rate. Fire rate. There we go. And the boss fire rate should start at 1. Okay. All right. So we got those two global variables in. So we should be good to go there. All right. So then what we're going to do is we are going to hop into the bullet collisions group. And we're going to go down near the end. We're going to find that part where it said boss type is greater than 2. Okay. So if you guys remember this part here, I said the reason why we had this greater than 2 that we reset it to 0 because in the frames we only had a frame for 0, 1, and 2, right? Well, now we're going to change this because if you go to our wave system, we've coded for boss type 4 and 5. So now the boss type can increase and go higher. And so we've told it like what to do with the type and with the animation frame. So it will be able to assign an animation frame and type to the boss, even if that boss type global variable goes higher. So because we've coded it now, we can increase this up to 5. Okay. So now basically every time we've gone through 5 boss types, that's going to be a cycle, and then we're going to reset the boss type back to 0. But every time that we have to reset the boss type back to 0, we're going to make the bosses harder the next time around. So we're going to add an action, and we're going to do system, add to, and we're going to add to boss health 10. So then once we've done one cycle of bosses and we've gone through all 5 types, the next cycle through they're all going to have 35 health because we're adding 10 to the boss health here. Now, this is the global variable which isn't associated with their actual health, but in a minute we're going to add an event that will tie them together. Okay. We're also going to increase the boss fire rate. So we're going to add an action, system, add to, boss fire rate 1. So the boss fire rate is going to go up, which is going to make them shoot faster based on the equation we have in our game already. Okay. So now what we're going to do, in order to get the actual instance variable of the boss health to tie into this global variable, we have to make an action to do that. And we're going to do that in the wave system. So if we go back to the wave system here, okay, we're going to go into the spawn code. And basically right when the boss spawns, um, we are going to just basically put that right in here. So we're going to add an action here. So just in case you didn't see where I'm at. So I'm in this very first OR block here. Okay, this first OR block underneath the wave %2. We're going to add an action here. And we're going to do boss, set value. And we're going to set his health to match the boss health global variable. Okay, right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to move that right above the add 1 to enemies. We'll just put it right there. Okay. And then all we need to do is copy this and put this on the other one. So I'm going to hold control and I'm just going to click and drag it right above the add 1 to enemies. And we're going to do that on both of these. Okay. So on each OR block, you should have the set health to boss health. And that's what's going to tie those together. Okay. All right, so then what we're going to do is we are going to find the next section that we're on here, which is in the boss shooting. And we're going to look at the boss type 0. Okay. Now we're going to do the boss fire rate part of it, right? So what we're going to do is originally when we made the bosses, we did enemy fire rate, but that was just a placeholder because the enemies have their own. That's like the normal little enemies. So all that we need to do in here is we just need to change this from enemy fire rate to boss fire rate. So if I just go in here and type in the word boss, it should pick up. Yep. So we're going to change that to boss fire rate, and we're going to do that on all of these. So let's go ahead and change this one to boss fire rate. Okay. Then let's get this last one down here. So you should have to edit out 3 of these. Boss fire rate. There we go. Okay, so I've got those. And then we are going to adjust the bullet speeds a little bit as well. So 250 is good on the first one, but the second one we're going to go 450. And the third one we're going to go 650. All right. Perfect. All right, so we've got all that there. That should be good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set up lives for the player. So I'm going to just minimize that for now. We're going to right click and add a global variable, and we're just going to call it player lives. And we're going to give you 3 lives to start. Okay, once again, you could modify that a little bit. Okay, perfect. So player lives equals 3. Okay, and then we're going to go into the bullet collisions group, which we are right here. And what we're going to do is we are going to just add a new event at the bottom of the bullet collisions group. And basically when the player is destroyed now, instead of just like ending the game, we're going to subtract a life and have your player respawn. So we're going to do add an event to the bullet collisions group. We're going to do player on destroyed. Okay. We're going to subtract 1 from player lives. System subtract from player lives 1. Okay. Then if the player lives equals is greater than 0, we're going to respawn the player. Otherwise, we'll do a game over. So we're going to add a sub event to this. And we're going to do system compare variable. Then we're going to say player lives is greater than or equal to 0. So basically, if you get destroyed and it subtracts from your lives, if your lives are still above 0, it's going to respawn. So we're going to add an action. We're going to do system wait. Wait. We're going to wait 3 seconds. And then we're going to add an action and we're going to create the player. So we're going to do system, create, object, and we're going to create the player. And we're going to do it, the layer can be 0, but the X is going to be 600. And the Y is going to be 650. Okay, and then we're going to click done there. Okay, so we've got that part in. All right, so the next step now is we are going to create a power-up. So what we're going to do is just go to your layout out here, and we're just going to make a new sprite. So I'm going to double click in the gray area, make a sprite. We'll call it power-up. Now this is another one where in the presentation they tell you to draw your own, but we do have some pre-done sprites in the assets that you can just use. So in the animation frames window here, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to import frames from files. And if we go in here now, we should see power up. So power up 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to hold control and highlight all 3 of those. Open those up. I'm going to delete frame 0. And we're going to turn animation speed to 0. So I'm going to click on animation 1 in the upper right. I'm going to change speed to 0 right here. And we should be good to go. So we've got the power ups in. And then what we're going to do is I'm pretty sure the power-ups need to have bullet behavior. So I'm going to give them that as well. So I'm going to add a behavior to my power-ups. We're going to give it bullet. Okay. So bullet behavior there. Perfect. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the event sheet. And what I'm going to do is minimize any groups I'm not using. Okay, just keep it simple. And we're going to add a new group for the power-ups. So I'm going to right click out here and add a group, and we'll just call it power-ups. Okay. Okay, so now I've got a power-up group. Then basically what we're going to do with this is we're going to make it so when you defeat an enemy, that there's going to be a random chance that they drop a power-up, and then we're also going to randomize which power-up is actually dropped. So in order to start setting that up, we need to have basically a chance variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a global variable, and we are going to call it power-up chance. Okay, and the default value can just be 0, that's fine. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we are going to add an event to the power-ups, and we're going to basically when we destroy an enemy, so right now we're just talking about regular enemies, we want there to be a chance for a power-up to spawn. So we're going to do enemy on destroyed. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we are going to set the value of power-up chance. I'm going to add an action, system set value power-up chance. And what they tell you in the presentation is to do floor random 50. Actually, I think they use round instead. I'll explain what all those mean. So we'll do floor, random, and then 50. Okay. So just in case you don't remember, and it should look like this. In case you don't remember what this is from Game Design 1. So the word floor basically means it's going to round down. So think of the floor as being below you. It's going to take the number, because whenever we do, so I guess we should start with random 50, right? So random 50 means it's going to choose a random number out of 50 choices. Now, because a computer starts counting at 0, it's actually going to do between 0 and 49 is the range it's going to look, but that does include decimals. So it could do like 38.22573, like this long, ridiculous thing, right? We want to keep it nice, clean, whole numbers. So floor is just going to take the number and round it down. So if it's 38.75, whatever, it'll just make it 38. The opposite of that, if you want to round up, you could do ceiling. So that would be CEIL. That will round up. What they tell you in the presentation is to use the word round, which means it just rounds it to a whole number. So that would be fine. So round means if it's above, the halfway point, it'll round up, or it could round down. So honestly, any of the choices are fine as long as that, because what we're going to be doing below this is we're going to choose some trigger numbers that will trigger various power-ups. As long as it's possible for those numbers to hit, it really doesn't matter if you do floor or round or ceiling, okay, in this instance. So we should be good. So you can do whatever one you want. Now, what I'm going to recommend is when you actually test this out, I would like drastically lower this number, or like make it so that your numbers hit every time for testing. And I'll show you that maybe in a minute here. So then what we're going to do is we're going to add 3 sub events to this. So we're going to add one and then just copy and paste probably. So we're going to add a sub event to the enemy on destroyed. And we are going to do system compare variable, and we want to know what the power up chance has been chosen, right? Which one's been chosen. So we're going to say if power up chance equals 3. Now there's no like particular reason we're choosing the number 3. It's just 3 is a single number that could happen out of this random 50. So basically this is a 1 in 50 chance that this will happen every time you destroy an enemy. Okay. So then what we're going to do is we're going to add an action, and we're going to do enemy, and we're going to do spawn power up. I just want to make sure I do this right. Yep, spawn another object, power up. And we can leave the layer and image points there. Yep. So that should be good. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add an action, and we are going to do power up, and we're going to set the frame. So the power up has 3 frames. So we're going to have this one be frame 0. So we're going to do set frame to 0. Okay, so if the power up chance becomes 3, the enemy is going to spawn a power up, and it's going to be the frame 0, which is like this plus symbol here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste this whole event twice. So if you highlight it here, once again, you could just do Control C, Control V, and then Control V again to paste it twice. However you want to copy and paste it. And then here we're going to say if power up chance equals 10. Then when power up chance equals 10, we'll keep this the same, but we'll set the frame to 1. So we're basically, once again, there's no real reason why we're choosing 10 over another number. We're just picking something different, and 10 will still have a 1 in 50 chance to spawn out of here. Okay. And then here for the last one, we'll just choose 15. Once again, as long as these three numbers are different and they all could hit within this, it doesn't matter which numbers you pick. You just make sure that they're not repeated here and that there's something that's possible. They're within 0 to 49, right? Okay, and then here we'll set the frame to 2. So basically the way that this reads is that when an enemy is destroyed, it will test this variable. If it hits 3, it'll spawn the first power up. If it's 10, it will spawn the second one, or if it's 15, it'll spawn the third one. Okay, so that's basically it for that part there for the actual spawning, right? All right, now what we have to do is we need to make the power-ups act differently based on like which frame is showing or which kind we're collecting. So in order to help differentiate that, we're going to put an instance variable on the power-up. So I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to click on power-up and we're going to add instance variable right here. And we're going to give it a variable called type because we want to know what type of power-up it is. The other settings are fine, so you just click OK. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to set up some collision events for the power-ups. So I'm just going to add a new event to the power-ups group, and we're going to say power-up on collision with another object. Okay, and when it collides with the player, done. Okay. So one thing that will happen is we want to destroy the power-up. So that's going to happen no matter what kind of power-up we get. So we can just add that action right here. So we're just going to add an action for power-up destroy, like that. Okay. But then we need sub-events based on which type of power-up we've actually collected, right? So what we're going to do is we are going to add a sub-event here. And then we're going to do power-up, compare instance variable. Okay, and we want to know if type is equal to 0. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to copy and paste that really quick. So have it highlighted, Control C, and then Control V, do it twice. Okay, and then we're going to have it so if type equals 1, done. And we're going to have if type equals 2, done. Okay. And then what we'll do here is we're going to program these other two later because we don't have the variables and things yet set for those. But this first one we can do. So this plus symbol, which is basically the frame 0 one, that one is just going to give you an extra life. So we're just going to add an action, system, add 2, and lives. Let me see here, player lives 1. Okay, so that one we can do. Like I said, these other two we're going to come back to later. Okay. So back to the power up, there was a behavior that I missed. So if we go back, you can just click on power up here in the upper right. Let's go back down to behaviors in blue. So bullet, we wanted to keep, but we also need destroy outside layout. I forgot to put that one on. So let's go ahead and add destroy outside layout. Okay, so we should be good to go there. All right. And then what we're going to do is we are going to go back up here now. And what we have to do is now that we've created the instance variable, right here when the power-ups spawn, we're setting their frame to the correct frame, but we haven't done anything with the type yet. So now that we've made the type, we're going to set the types to match the frame number. So on this power-up chance equals 3, I'm going to add an action for power-up. We're going to set value, and we're going to set the type to 0. Okay, so right there. And then what I could do is if I don't want to manually do it, we could just hold control and I could drag this while holding control, and we're going to put a type on both of these ones here. And this one, the type is going to be 1. Okay, and this one, the type is going to be 2. Okay, and I know I went kind of fast there. So basically what this should look like is the type and animation frames should match. So on power up chance is 3, we should have the type and frame at 0. If chance is 10, the type and frame are 1. And if it's 15, the type and frame are 2. So the frame changes the visual appearance, and the type is going to change the effect down here when we actually collect it. Okay. So now to get the other power-ups working, one of our power-ups is going to be a shield. And so what we're going to do is when we collect the power-up, we're going to have a shield variable that would basically are going to toggle on and off whether the player has a shield or not. So we need to add an instance variable for shield on the player. So we're just going to highlight the player here on the right. We're going to add an instance variable called shield. Shield. And the number can just be 0 to start. Okay, so we've got the shield. And let's see, we already did animation speed 0, so we should be good there. Okay. All right, so now what we can do is we can add, now that we have the shield variable, we can now go and add that in here. So we're going to say if type equals 1, we're going to add an action for the player, and we are going to set value. Yep, and we're going to set the value of shield to 1. Basically, the way the shield is going to work is the shield is either going to be 1 or 0. So if the shield is 0, it means you don't have a shield. If the shield is 1, it means your shield is active. Okay, so we're going to set the shield to 1 there. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the player's frame to 1. So we're going to add an action for the player, and we're going to set frame to 1. Okay. Now, depending on what we've done, I don't remember if we did it yet or not. I'm going to check in a minute. But we need to have an animation frame for the player that actually shows the player with the shield on. Okay. And then what we're going to do is after we set the shield and we set the frame to 1, we're basically going to set a timer on the shield for how long it lasts. So we're just going to put a wait action in here. So we're going to add an action. We're going to do system wait. Okay. And we'll make the shield last 10 seconds. So we'll have a 10-second wait. And then what we'll do is we will just set the frame and the shield to 0. So we'll just add an action for player, set value, and we'll set shield to 0, and then we'll set the frame to 0. Add action, player, set frame, and we'll put that back to 0. So basically the way it works, if you touch the power up and its type is 1, your shield variable goes to 1, your frame goes to 1 to show you have a shield on, it'll wait 10 seconds, and then it will remove the shields. So let's check on that really quick. So let's double click on our player, and we don't have the shield in there yet. So what we're going to do is we just need to right click down in the frame window, and we just need to add a frame. And then if you click on the blank frame, we're just going to go and load an image, and there should be a shield image in here. Yep, player shield right here. So we have that there, and that should be good to go. We shouldn't have to change anything else with it, but we do need to make the animation speed 0. So click on animation 1 at the top, change the speed to 0. If you don't have that animation speed 0, he's just going to animate and always look like he has a shield on, even if you don't. All right, so we've got that set, so that's good to go. So next what we're going to do, let me just double check my notes here. Okay, so we just have to, yep, okay, so we're not going to get to the third power up yet. We're going to do a couple of things here first, and then we'll come back to this type equals 2 here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up the collisions so that you basically won't die if you have a shield on. So we need to go back up to the bullet collisions group. We want to find enemy bullet on collision with player. Now, it's really important here. In the written presentation, this is a part where they have like a bunch of mistakes on the same slide. So as long as, obviously, if you're listening to me right now, you're doing it by the video. If you do what I do here, you're doing it correctly. But just in case like you're comparing the video to the written instructions, the written instructions are very incorrect in this part, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to say enemy bullet on collision with player, right? We're going to add a sub event to this to determine if we have a shield or not. So I'm going to right click on the green arrow. We're going to add a sub event. We're going to do player, and we're going to compare instance variable. Let me see, instance variable. Okay. And basically we want to know if the shield is 0. So if the shield is 0, this means the player does not have a shield. So what we're going to do is instead of the player always getting destroyed when they get hit by a bullet, we're just going to move it down to this condition here. So now what happens is when the bullet hits the player, if the shield is 0, then the player gets destroyed. But if the shield is 1, this will not trigger and the player will not get destroyed. So the shield effectively now will be protecting you as long as you have that active, right? Okay, then we have to do this exact same event here. So what we can do is we could just copy and paste it, or we could drag it, and we want it below the boss bullet on collision with enemy. So what I'm going to do is, because it's down a little bit, I'm just going to do Control C to copy, and I'm going to find the boss bullet on collision with player. Let's find that really quick here. Boss bullet on collision with player right here. And then what I'm going to do is, with that event highlighted, I can just press Control V and it will paste it down here. And since the player is being destroyed here, I can delete this one out. Okay. Now the errors that are, oh, and it actually didn't paste that in as a sub event. So let me fix that. This needs to be a sub event. So, and I'm just going to drag that over. So if copying it is confusing, just right click on the boss bullet, add sub event, just make it again if that was kind of confusing. But it's important that that is a sub event there. So the mistakes that the presentation made is they left the player destroy up here as well, which doesn't make any sense because then it doesn't matter what your shield is, you'll always get destroyed. So they left that in on the slide where they show you the example. So you need to make sure that that top destroy is gone. It should only be destroyed when the shield is 0. The other mistake they made, this one was a really bad one, is this sub event here, they actually put it on the player bullet on collision with enemy instead. So what that means is if your shield is 0 and you shoot an enemy, you die. So that was a really bad mistake that they made on the presentation. So as long as yours looks like this, once again, it should make sense, right? You're only comparing the shield if you're getting hit by the bullet, not if you're shooting the enemy. That doesn't make any sense. So as long as you did it like I have here, you're good to go. The sample code on Google Classroom is correct. So if you look at the sample code in there, it will be correct on there. So you should be good to go there. Okay, so we've got that part done there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the third power-up. So I'm going to minimize this. We'll go back to power-ups. So for this third power-up, we're going to give you a triple gun where you shoot 3 bullets instead of 1. So once again, kind of like the shield, we need a variable on the player to track that. So I'm going to click on player. I'm going to go instance variables. I'm going to add an instance variable called triple gun. Triple gun. Okay. And that can just be 0 right away. Okay. And now that we have the triple gun variable in, now we can go ahead and enter in the action for the type equals 2 here in the power up group. So we're going to add an action for player and we're going to do set value. And we're going to set triple gun to 1. So basically, it's going to be kind of like the shield, right? If it's 0, no triple gun. If it's 1, you have a triple gun, and we're just going to toggle it between 0 and 1 is all that we're going to do, okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to just set a timer on it. So we'll just do a wait 10 seconds again. So system wait, then we'll do 10. Now you can modify these times if you want to. So set triple gun to 1, wait 10 seconds, and then we're going to basically set triple gun back to 0. So understanding some of these basic power-up concepts is going to be really good for your final project because typically you know a lot of final projects do have some type of power up or upgrade that maybe is set to a timer. These are really good examples. So basically you just have a variable somewhere, typically an instance variable, that just tracks whether you have the power up or not, and then you can just set a timer and then reset the variable back to 0, and then you just make an event that says if the power up is 1, then do the action for the power up. If it's 0, then just do the regular action, you know. So that's what we're going to do right now. So we're going to go to the event where we shoot. So that's going to be way at the top. I think it's under user input, way up here. So here's our space press to shoot, right? So if we press space, we just shoot 1 normal bullet. So all we're going to do is we're going to add a sub event to this that says if the triple gun is active, we're just going to spawn 2 extra bullets. So let's add a sub event to this. Let's see, sub event. And then we're going to do player, compare instance variable. So let's just go, oh, there it is. Okay, and then we're just going to say if the triple gun, we could just say equal to 1, or we could say greater than 0. Either way is fine. So we'll just say greater than 0, because it's only going to be 0 or 1, so it doesn't really matter. So if the triple gun is greater than 0, then basically we're going to add an action for the player to spawn an extra bullet. So we're going to do player spawn. and they're going to spawn a player bullet. And this stuff can just stay the same. Now, here's the issue. If we are just spawning another bullet in the same spot, it's just going to be two bullets on top of each other, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to make the extra bullets move at a different angle so that they shoot in a different direction. So right after we spawn that bullet, we're going to add an action for the player bullet, and we're going to set angle of motion. So set angle of motion, and this one's going to be 260. Okay. And then basically we're going to do the same thing and just spawn another bullet. So what I might do is I'm just going to hold control and highlight both of them. And then I'm going to do control C to copy, control V to paste another set here. And then for the second one, we have to do a different angle because if they match the angle, they're going to be on top of each other. So we're going to make this one 280. Okay. So basically by adjusting these degrees slightly, one bullet's going to shoot up above at a different angle and one's going to shoot below at a different angle. So when you test that, you'll find out. Okay. All right. And then we just want to double check one thing before we move on. We just want to make sure that the enemy and boss are getting destroyed before the set enemies to 0 and the call start wave is last. So if you've done everything and that looks right, then that's going to basically be the end of section 3. Okay, so the last thing I just wanted to show you really quick here was how to test your power-ups more reliably, right? This is just for testing purposes. Um, so trying to test this out at a 1 in 50 chance, like you could play it for like quite a while and just not even see a power-up. So for testing, what I like to do is add an extra action here to the enemy on destroyed. So if you want to do this, this isn't a bad idea. And what we're going to do is we're going to do system set value, and we're going to set power up chance.